and welcome to Mary's Eclectic Interests. I'm your host, Sue Ellen Zagrabelny, and our guest today is Jim Clark, Superintendent of the Fine Arts Department of the Minnesota State Fair. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
It sounds like a pretty exciting job. How did you get the job of being Superintendent of the Fine Arts Department of the Minnesota State Fair? What can you tell us about your background?
Well, that's a great question. I suppose it started as a kid. I mean, as far as my background, I've always liked to draw, and maybe it's a cliche to say it, but it's certainly true. Always making marks, and I was fortunate enough that my parents were very supportive in that realm and exposed me to a lot of art and art activities and art happenings throughout my childhood. As I grew up, I developed those things. I got my undergraduate degree in art at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I was away from art then for a while, at least professionally, working in construction and whatnot, making a living and paying bills. But I got back to it, went back to school at Vesper College in Northeast Minneapolis. I got an MFA in ecological architecture with a sculptural bent in that. So adding to skills, skill building. And then back to the fair and how I became the superintendent as a teenager. End of high school, just out of high school, I worked on the staff in the Fine Arts building under a former superintendent. He was my high school art teacher, a mentor, and a friend, Brad Nerala. End of 2010 or 2011, the fair was looking for a new superintendent, and they approached Brad about coming back. He wasn't interested at that time, but he suggested that they, sit down and talk with me, and we had an interview, and it went all right. So the rest is a little history.
Your first show occurred during the 100th anniversary of the fair.
Yeah.
And what kind of preparation led up to that first exhibit for you?
Well, quite a bit. I mean, it's one thing to come on to that position, to that job, to that responsibility on a non-anniversary year. And maybe that might have been the preference, but I was excited to come on, and having it be the 100th year was an opportunity for us to look backwards a little bit at the history of the juried competition at the fair, as well as looking forward and at things that we might be pursuing and presenting as the show grew. That year, we have, well, let me roll back and say, traditionally, historically, the Fine Arts Department has presented two exhibitions in essence. The majority of our gallery space is devoted to presenting the result of a juried art competition, open to all living Minnesota artists. And then there's a smaller section of our gallery that we use to present a special exhibition. And that exhibition would change from year to year, coming up to 2011. And when I came on, I decided to present the special exhibition that year was acknowledging the 100th anniversary, and it was a retrospective looking back at important, notable Minnesota artists that had participated in the fair over those 100 years.
Oh my goodness.
Many people probably don't know that there's been artists that have participated in the jury competition that went on to statewide, regional, national, and international acclaim. George Morrison, for instance, very well-known painter and draftsman, artist from Minnesota. He participated in the juried exhibition as a student at what became MCAT. So we had
MCAT is
the Minneapolis College of Art and Design.
okay.
And the name that it had before is escaping me right now, but the Minneapolis School of Art along those lines. So we presented work by quite a few very well-known Minnesota artists that had participated over the years that year. And then in 2012, the special exhibition was 12-12-12. 12 artists, 12 hours, 12 days. It was an artist in residence program. It was an opportunity to bring a different Minnesota artist in each day of the fair to use a small portion of our gallery as their studio space, as a working space. And a great opportunity to present to our fair guests how art comes to be. I mean, it's so often, I think, a fairly pervasive idea of art and art making is that of the artist sitting in a comfy chair in their studio, kind of ruminating and waiting for a muse to hit them over the head, right, with inspiration. When will inspiration strike? Where so often, as is with the case with many different pursuits, professional and otherwise, that humans endeavor to engage in, great art generally comes from a great deal of work. Labor, deliberation, consideration, working and reworking, much like a television program. And many times, art making doesn't look like we might assume art making looks. Certainly, there are many of us can imagine a painter or a sculptor or someone working on the wheel in ceramics. But we've had photographers out and they've plugged away on a computer editing on Photoshop the entire day, and we had fair guests come up and say, what's going on here? This is much different than I would expect. I mean, this doesn't look like art making at all. It looks like work.
And that's exactly what 90% of it is.
Yes.
If you're lucky, you've got 10% of the time that the muse hits.
For sure.
That the muse hits. What changes have transpired since you took over in 2011?
That's a great question. One answer is the special exhibition. The first year I was on, it was a retrospective, and the second year we instituted the 12-12-12, and then we changed the name to Studio Here. And so we're now in our fourth year of having the Artist in Residence program at the fair, because it's been very successful, very popular, and there are so many varied ways in which artists work. Even a photographer here will treat their labor much differently than another photographer. Same with the sculptors or the painters or the draftspeople. So in addition, maybe the most significant change was in our submission process.
Okay.
For 100 years of the fair, each and every piece that was submitted was hand-delivered in life to our building. Our competition is open to every living Minnesota artist, and that's a lot of people. That's a wide constituency. And we handle going back about 30 years, the average is 18 to 1900 pieces.
Okay.
We only have so much room in our gallery.
Right.
We can comfortably hold about between 320, 330 pieces. So the acceptance rate, going back a good 30 years, has been roughly 15%. So at the time that everyone hand-delivered their work, they did so knowing that there was a very high probability chance that that very next weekend, after the jurors would make their decisions on what work would be in the show, that they'd have to come pick up their work. A greater than 1 in 5 chance that they'd have to make that trip again. And that is, it's an inconvenience for those that live maybe in the cities, but it's a real hardship for those that live outstate. And we want to represent, and we want to engage, and we want all Minnesota artists participating in the show. Those from Winona or Pipestone or War Road, International Falls, all these places that are a bit further afield, we'd like them to participate. But we know that the best way to evaluate, experience, right? The best way to experience the work, let alone evaluate it, is in life. So we instituted a 2-phase system. The first phase is a digital adjudication. Our jurors review digital images that the entrant has submitted, and from those, they get a certain number to bring in for that live jury day.
Okay.
And this was done to ensure that we were serving that broad constituency to the best of our abilities. When we were bringing in 2,000 some works, which we did in 2011, we physically handled more than 2,000 pieces. That becomes quite difficult to handle physically, to store safely.
Right, right.
In addition, it'd be very easy for a juror in one of our larger classes, particularly in oil, acrylic, mixed media, or in photography. They're receiving 600 to 800 to 900 pieces.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, it's a huge number. And to look at those in one day for one human being, very easy, very understandable for image fatigue to set in, and physical fatigue for that matter.
So is the jurying done in one day when that second phase happens?
The second phase is in one day, and currently the first phase is done over a period of 5 days. So they have much longer to look at the work.
But that's still a pretty intense schedule.
It is an intense schedule, but with those 5 days, the jurors can do it for some amount of time, get away from it for a little bit, get some fresh eyes. They can rate them, they can re-rate them, they can sort by rating. We're doing our best to ensure that each and every work gets its full due attention.
That's important, the idea that if people are going to make the effort to submit their work,
For sure.
the idea that they get the full attention is important.
Absolutely. And we have, again, traditionally, we were running historically on average between 18 and 1900 pieces. But there are more Minnesota artists than that number. But if we had received 3,000 pieces or even more than 2,100, we were going to have, it wouldn't be feasible to handle that work. And now with this system, we could easily handle 10,000 works. And in fact,
wouldn't that be something?
It would be, and this year we had a record number of entrants. 2,359 people entered the competition.
What makes the difference between a fine arts submission and something else?
Oh, that's a great question.
Because I can think of needlecraft. I can think of
Yeah.
various might be called arts and crafts.
Certainly.
But what's the difference?
Right. That is an excellent question. I should start by explaining how we have 8 classes of competition. And they run according to media, plus or minus. Our first class is oil acrylic mixed media, the painting class, essentially. Class 2 is sculpture. Class 3 is the water media, watercolor, gouache, cassine, and tempera. Class 4 is drawing and pastels. Class 5 is prints. Class 6, ceramics and glass. Class 7, textiles and fibers.
Oh,
And Class 8 is photography.
okay.
Now, that gives you a sense of the categories, the classifications one can compete in our endeavor. But certainly, as long as human beings have been creating, humans have been creating outside of neat boxes of classification, and we acknowledge that. In addition, we don't legislate, we don't dictate, we don't tell people what they do is art and other people what you do is not art. We accept any submissions that satisfy our rules, and these rules are size-based. There are things about framing for two-dimensional wall-hanging works, and that's primarily, again, for safe handling more than anything. But we have people enter works that some might say are craft or fine craft versus art or fine art. But in the end, that decision on inclusion or non-acceptance into the fair is based on the juror's decision.
Okay.
And so we don't make those distinctions. We don't say what you do is not art. You should present that in a different building, because we're engaging in a subjective activity. So it gets down to the jurors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can people submit in more than one category?
They cannot. Yeah.
Okay.
There's only we only allow them to enter one piece.
Okay.
And that would be in one class. Years ago, I mean, as things change, right? There have been times in the past where artists could submit more than one work or in more than one category, and maybe we'll revisit that sometime. But currently, the way this, the volume of work that we handle, one is appropriate. But I'm constantly reviewing and our procedures and protocol to see how we could better serve our constituency. And I know that many artists engage in more than one, create in more than one medium. I myself draw primarily, but I also paint and I sculpt some. So it becomes, it's darn difficult. It's terribly difficult when it comes down to making the choice of what to enter when given just the one work. And I remember that that difficulty, right, to decide. But somewhat fortunately, really more unfortunately, but I cannot myself enter the competition because I choose and hire the jurors, and there would be a conflict there. But the rest of my staff is allowed to enter, and many do. Some get in, some don't. Some are in 1 year, some are not. It is highly competitive.
Oh, yes.
So
You mentioned the jurors. How are they chosen?
that's a great question as well. I choose them based on a matrix of their body of work, primarily, their experience, and their background in education. Now, one need not have each and every one of these components. I'm looking primarily for a practicing artist.
Okay.
I see it as peer review. There are many other ways that one might adjudicate an art competition, but I'm looking for professional artists that are working in the medium that they would be judging.
Okay.
And primarily, I'm looking at their body of work. I mean, is this exciting, interesting work, and have they been doing it for a while? It's always great to find someone that also has some education background, teaching, but it's not a requirement.
Okay.
One reason I look for our teachers is they tend to have a well-rounded view of the arts, and they acknowledge and understand things that are going on outside of their pursuit or their aesthetic wheelhouse, their aesthetic bias, because we are looking to present the full spectrum of activities that Minnesota artists are engaging in. Collect age information, and I know that there have been in the past young people that have gotten into the show, and that's wonderful. That there is there at the fair, the education building also presents artwork done by youth specifically.
Okay.
So there is that avenue for youth artists, but that isn't to say that they cannot or should not enter our competition. It's a great idea. But it tends to be adults. I know that we have had, though, with that being said, we've had work that has been executed by young people. Our competition is a true pro-am. As it's open to every Minnesotan that feels that what they are doing is an art activity. We have professionals, we have hobbyists, we have the full range there, and we welcome and embrace it.
Oh, that's terrific. Let's see. You mentioned about 1,900 works coming through that first digital running. What was you said about 15%, so 300 and some works?
Yeah, and the numbers can get foggy and murky, and I know that there can be misunderstandings about all that. So it's important to me to be as transparent with that process as possible. I've done a lot of talking about it, and one would hope that it's become succinct and easy to follow. But we know the number of works that fit in the building plus or minus comfortably without being overly scrunched.
Right.
And that's between 320, 330 plus or minus. Now it depends on relative size and how many freestanding sculpture versus wall hanging, but that's about the number. And we use that number played against the total number of entries on any given year to find out the proportion of what we could accept. Because one year we might have 4,000 entries, and another year we might have 1,000 entries. But even with more entries, we don't have more space, so it would affect the acceptance percentage.
Right.
Yeah. This year, the jurors looked at 2,359 works total in that first phase, looking at images submitted digitally on the computer, images of the submitted works. And from those, they were given a guideline number that they could choose to come in for a second phase of live adjudication. And that number was 560 some works. And so of the 2,359, 560 or so were brought in for the second phase, and from those, 327 were chosen for display this year.
Okay. Does the artist stay with the work, or is this a blind adjudication?
It's a blind adjudication, yep. The jurors wouldn't, certainly during the first phase, they are given an image of the work, up to 3 images of the same work in actuality. And what that does is it allows the artist, the 3-dimensional artist, like a sculptor or a ceramicist, to present different views in space. Or for a 2-dimensional artist, they might present the full frontal image and then 2 additional supporting images of details of the work.
Okay.
So at that stage, one sees the images of the work, the title, and their dimensions in inches.
And that's
And
all.
that's it.
Okay.
So they're judging based on the work itself and not the name of the artist. Now, when the work comes in, my expectation is the juror is looking at the work again, but there are tags applied to the backs and bottoms of the work that have the names. I'm not standing next to each and every person all the time.
But it wouldn't be encouraged. In
It's
other words.
certainly not encouraged and in fact discouraged, but who knows, right? Yeah.
Right. How do you ensure the safety of these works when they're in your building?
That's a great question as well. My staff are experienced, they're trained and experienced in handling work. So that's first and foremost. In addition to that, for instance, even for this first phase, there's such a large volume of work coming in, we require the wall-hanging 2-dimensional pieces like paintings, drawings, prints, photos, they must be framed. And that is because we stack the work frame against the wall during that jury process. And that helps protect the pieces themselves. Now, there are a lot of additional presentation techniques that don't involve frames, unfortunately. And I engage in some of those myself when I'm showing my work. Unfortunately, because of our competition and the amount of work that we handle, we can't accommodate those less traditional presentations for the safety of the work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You said you had 327 works in this display, this exhibit. Can you explain how you determine the layout? Besides the fact that you've got to get 327 in, but
Sure.
what's the guest going to expect when he or she comes to the exhibit?
That's my favorite part of the experience, is curating the installation of the show. That in itself is a creative activity. There are certainly many philosophies and protocols, procedures one might follow in curating an art exhibition. I hang the work in a manner that one work plays off another by visual sympathies and contrasts. It's so easy with 327 works to be overwhelmed. It's a big day for our guests at the fair. There's so many things going on, so much stimuli. There's so many things going on. So when they come to our building, I want the experience to promote active viewing, engagement, and to keep one's energy level up. And that is mixing up sizes of works, mixing up the media as one goes along, changing eye levels. One thing I don't do is I don't present work by subject matter, for instance. And that might be one way to do it, certainly put all the images of fish together. But the problem that I find with that is these works might not have any visual sympathies, and it becomes a chaotic experience visually, while they have a cognitive, thought-based through thread or cohesion.
Okay.
They don't have a visual cohesion, and so that's what I'm looking for. Not a row of 16 by 20, 16 by 20. If you just go by box, 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 all the same size, you tend to bog down.
Right.
So we're changing up sizes, we're changing up media, we're looking to present some work that might have the unexpected sympathy, the unexpected play between them, and that makes one think, boy, I never realized how a non-objective, non-representational, abstract work might share certain qualities with this photograph that is, so objectively representational. So that's what we're looking at when we curate the show.
That's interesting. When we were talking off camera, there are several special awards or special prizes given. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. In addition to the Jurors Awards, and the jurors decide on which works are chosen for display, and in addition, they choose first, second, third, fourth, and honorable mentions for their class. So there are 8 first prize winners.
Okay.
In addition to those Jurors Awards, we have roughly 30 special sponsored awards. And any individual, group, entity, school, business are eligible to sponsor a special award. The threshold amount is $100, but the amount is up to the entity that's presenting that award. They're invited to come in to a special time period before the fair opens to select the work that they would like to honor.
Okay.
And they come up with the parameters for that. We don't guide or legislate that at all.
Okay.
It might simply be the work that most that a person or a group loves the most, the one that speaks to them the most. But they might also alternatively set up very finite parameters or criteria for that work. There's Robert Meyer, for instance, a former superintendent to the show. He has in the past sponsored a sculpture award. So there are those types of awards. As Ron Merchant, he sponsors an oil painting award, and others they leave it open.
Oh, so there's a lot of possibilities then for people getting recognized.
Oh, absolutely.
And is the sponsored award every year? Do some people do it year by year, or do new sponsors come on?
Yes, there quite a few. Once they're on, they continue to do that on an annual basis, but we get new sponsors as well. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing.
Fairgoers vote for favorite piece in the show.
They do.
How do fairgoers go about getting in on that People's Choice Award?
For sure. When a fair guest comes in our building, we have a station that has paper ballots. They can grab that ballot. There's two So there's two subdivisions of the People's Choice. There's an adult choice and there's a kid's choice. The kid's choice is for people 12 and under and adults 12 and up. They can bring that paper through. We ask for the name of the artist, and once they find that piece, they write it down and they can bring it up to the front desk, or there's a ballot box next to the door. We tally those up the day before the fair ends, the day before Labor Day, and we announce the winner on the last day of the fair. On Labor Day, we announce that winner. In addition, the winners of Adults and Kids' Choice are posted on our website online. So one wouldn't have to wait an entire year to find out who the winner was.
Right. There's a scavenger hunt that is sponsored by the Fine Arts Building.
And, you know, I said curation was my favorite part. They're all my favorite parts because the Fine Arts Detective is my favorite part of the show as well. Fine Arts Detective has been a tradition since before I was superintendent, for sure. But since I've come on, we've expanded it. The assistant superintendent and my friend, Mr. C.J. Renner, he is the one that comes up with the Fine Arts Detective sheets. It's a piece of paper with 10 or so questions on it, and in essence, it's a bit of a scavenger hunt, looking at the work that's in our building. It includes questions about the juried competition. It includes questions about our special exhibition. Some are very specific traditional scavenger hunt type questions, you know, maybe regarding finding, say, a work with the word bicycle in its title. So there are specific goal-based questions, but there are also wonderful open-ended interpretive questions on that Fine Arts Detective sheet as well that promote engaged viewing. I am a big proponent of looking and looking hard. So much nowadays is about interactivity and putting things that people can touch and push and do and manipulate. But I find active observation is a type of subtle interaction that is maybe underappreciated. And that Fine Arts Detective sheet is a great tool to promote that experience. And we have people that come back year after year really excited to take that sheet. And there's two levels, the original and then the PhD level, or I like to say hard and super extra hard.
Okay.
And it's great for kids of all ages. You know, it originally was specifically for children, but we found that there were adults that enjoyed to participate in it. And the PhD version isn't necessarily the adults version to the regular being the kids, because we found that children like that enhanced challenge of the PhD version as well. And the answers that we get, particularly on the open-ended questions, have just been so incredibly exciting to me and gratifying too. When we get one that is of particular note, we try to pass on the answer to the artist because they're just wonderful interpretive perspectives on the things that we're presenting that you might not otherwise hear or know. And it illustrates how wonderful art is as a part of our human experience.
One of the things that I notice about kids nowadays and about adults too is they're wedded to their screens. They're wedded to, punch this and that, like you were referring to.
Sure.
What do you see? You touched on it. what do you see this interactive or engaged observation doing for kids? Do you think that's a something that will be helpful for them?
Certainly, and not that I'm an expert in childhood development or anything along those lines. That's not my background. That's not my the primary thrust of my pursuit. But I'm a parent, and even with my two sons, I hope for them the ability with technology, which is so great. I mean, they're growing up punching the buttons and working with the phones and all that stuff, but also the ability to peel back from that, to step away from it, and to use our eyeballs and use our brains, and again, actively view, and not just let it wash over us, which is a wonderful aspect and a great part of the experience of art and of entertainment is to let the experience wash over us, but also to reflect, to evaluate, to compare, to contrast, to consider how a piece presents a viewpoint that's unlike our own, or how is this viewpoint that's unlike my own, how is it in some ways similar? What is it that I find so beautiful about this piece, even though it's not presenting to me a slice of my own life? Those types of active engagement. I'm no different than many. I love to watch television, and I play on my phone, and I play on the computer and whatnot. But it's nice to have a mix of experiences and to have that tool of active observation as a part of one's repertoire, one's tool bags.
Yes, yes, indeed. Could you tell the audience where the Fine Arts Building is located on the fair?
Certainly. It's the corner of Cosgrove and Randall, so it's in the northeast corner, plus or minus northeast central of the fairgrounds. If you were to come in the Snelling Gate, the main gate, and you immediately took a right on Cosgrove, you'd go past the wonderful Creative Activities Building, the Education Building, the 4-H Building, and then our building is at the end of that block.
Okay.
Right before the Progress Center. And the Fine Arts Building, the Fine Arts Center is in the former Dairy Building.
Okay.
Prior to 1980, the Fine Arts exhibition was presented on the third floor of the grandstand. And
that's where I remember it from.
Exactly.
From the old days, yes.
For sure. And then in 1980, and I believe at that time the superintendent was Bob Lesh, they moved it into the Dairy Building now. And at that time, he decided on the layout of the walls, and they've stayed much the same because he did a dynamite job. The layout of the floor plan and the way the walls are designed, that space promotes an active viewing experience. And so, the former Dairy Building, once in a while we're walking the floor during the fair, answering questions and ensuring that the art is safe, I hear people on their cell phone, I'm in the art barn. And rather, I mean, I might be somewhat chagrined by that, but I'm delighted or charmed in that it is the art barn, and then that's a wonderful thing. And that's a part of the Studio Here Artist in Residence program too. I mean, you can go down and you can go to the horse barn and you can see the horses and you can go down to the swine barn and you can see the hogs and whatnot, and then you come into the art barn and hey, there's an artist in a stall here, and they're doing their thing.
And the idea that someone might go to the art barn, maybe wondering, where the dairy barn is.
Oh, sure.
If they were an old timer and were used to the old way it used to be.
Yes.
And that's even more charming.
For sure. And it shines a spotlight that for me on how the Fine Arts Department at the State Fair is just a wonderful, unique beast, because we get so many different people through our building. I mean, by our count, we get over 250,000 people through the building over the course of the fair, and that's a lot of eyeballs and a lot of minds. And for many of our guests, and we know this from our interactions, for many of our guests, it's their one experience with fine art for the entire year. They're not regular museum goers or gallery guests or opening reception attendees. They're getting fine art during the fair, and it's a wonderful thing because we see that as an opportunity, a gateway into additional art experiences outside of the fair, that they might get so excited about looking at work that's being done by their fellow Minnesotans that they might seek out other experiences, art-related, throughout the other parts of the year. And we also get plenty of art collectors and savvy both artists as well as patrons of the arts, dedicated gallery goers, museum members, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's a wonderful representation of, again, the rich spectrum and tapestry that is our wonderful state.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add to our discussion and conversation today?
Well, I as superintendent of the Fine Arts Department, you get a certain amount of attention for what happens in that building and the programs and procedures. And I have a great crew. I mean, it doesn't come. It comes about through the hard work of a great crew. And my assistant superintendent, C.J. Renner, again, does a fantastic job. And my entire crew, great people. Many of them have been there for the 5 years that I have been superintendent, and a number of our staff have been on for 15, 16 years.
Oh my goodness.
And
do you work throughout the year then, or what's your time parameter?
We are really heavy with hands-on labor, the end of July going through the first week of September. That is the high season for this activity. But I have my fingers on the pulse of what's going on and how we're going to manage the program throughout the year. We have to set up the jurors. We have to find the artists and invite the artists for our special exhibition. We have to consider rule changes. Sure. The competition opens the first Monday of April each year, and so there's review of rules before that time, et cetera, et cetera. So there's little things I'm doing throughout the year, but primarily this is the high season,
right?
July through first part of September. Yeah.
And so your staff is there through that high season, as you say.
Yeah.
And you're pretty much on your own the rest of the year? Pretty much.
Except for, again, the assistant superintendent, we work as a team on those endeavors, planning, strategic endeavors throughout the year. You know.
Oh, that sounds exciting. Well, this has been a wonderful visit. I hope this encourages people to go out to the fair and see something maybe that they haven't seen before.
Absolutely.
For being on Mary's Eclectic Interests, and we look forward to seeing you next time.